forest lights up. It was the early hours of December 26, 1980, a freezing night in Suffolk, England. Christmas had just passed. RAF Woodbridge, used by the U.S. Air Force at the time, was quiet, surrounded by the dense, shadowy expanse of Rendlesham Forest. For the soldiers on duty, it was meant to be another uneventful night. But around 3 a.m., something strange appeared in the sky, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Two patrolmen reported seeing strange lights descending through the trees, glowing red, blue, and white. Their first thought was simple. A plane had gone down. This was the Cold War era. Tensions were high, and military personnel were trained to expect the unexpected. A possible aircraft crash meant immediate action. Sergeant Jim Peniston and Airman John Burroughs were dispatched into the woods to investigate. As they approached, the atmosphere grew stranger. Animals in a nearby farm began to panic. Dogs barked wildly, and cows stamped nervously in their pens. The forest itself felt charged, as if humming with static electricity. The men pressed on through the undergrowth. Then, in a small clearing, they saw it. A triangular metallic object about 3 meters across and 2 meters high, glowing with an unearthly light. It hovered or stood on legs, depending on who told the story. Burroughs would later recall that the object seemed to pulse with color, shifting from red to blue to white, almost alive. Peniston, the senior officer, cautiously approached, circling the craft. He later claimed he could make out strange symbols etched onto its surface, like hieroglyphics or alien markings. He even touched it, describing the surface as smooth, like glass. As they stood there, the object suddenly emitted a blinding flash of light. The men stumbled back, shielding their eyes. And then, just as suddenly, it rose silently above the trees and shot into the night sky at incredible speed. When daylight came, investigators returned to the site. What they found deepened the mystery. On the forest floor, in the exact clearing where Peniston and Burroughs said the craft had landed, were 3 small triangular impressions, each about 1.5 inches deep, as if heavy legs had pressed into the soil. The surrounding trees showed signs of scorch marks and broken branches, as if exposed to intense heat or force. Local police were called, but their conclusion was far less dramatic. They dismissed the marks as the result of animals like rabbits digging in the dirt. And the strange lights? They suggested it was nothing more than the distant beam of the Orford Ness lighthouse, 5 miles away, which had a powerful rotating lamp visible from the forest. To them, there was nothing mysterious. But to the U.S. servicemen who had stood face to face with the object, this explanation felt like an insult. Peniston, in particular, was shaken. He insisted he had touched the craft, felt its strange heat, and even copied down the symbols he claimed were inscribed on its hull. Over the years, his story would only grow stranger. He later said that when he touched the markings, he received a vision of binary code streaming into his mind, something he wrote down in a notebook. That night, however, all they had were impressions in the ground, burned trees, and the uneasy silence of the forest. Whispers began to spread across the base. Some of the men refused to talk about it. Others swapped stories of lights darting through the sky, faster than any aircraft they knew. For Peniston, Burroughs, and others who entered Rendlesham Forest that night, there was no going back. Something had happened there, something they couldn't explain. And while officials tried to dismiss it, the mystery of those lights, that craft, and those marks on the forest floor would only grow deeper over the following nights. Rendlesham Forest had woken up, and this was just the beginning. Voices in the dark. 2 nights after the first encounter, the forest was restless once again. Strange lights had returned, and rumors were spreading across RAF Woodbridge. Some men laughed it off as imagination. Others whispered about something lurking out there among the trees. On the night of December 28, 1980, Lieutenant Colonel Charles I Halt, the deputy base commander, decided to take matters into his own hands. Halt was not the kind of man easily swayed by stories. A no-nonsense officer, he believed in evidence, not superstition. But as the second-in-command of one of America's most important Cold War air bases, he could not ignore the persistent reports. So, just after midnight, Halt assembled a small group of men, including security police and technical specialists, and set out into Rendlesham Forest. Unlike the first patrol, this time they carried equipment: radios, floodlights, and even a Geiger counter to measure radiation. If something strange had really happened here, Halt intended to document it. What followed became one of the most famous audio recordings in UFO history, the Halt Tape. For more than 18 minutes, as his team moved through the forest, Halt narrated everything he saw into a pocket recorder. His voice, calm but laced with disbelief, described strange phenomena that remain unexplained to this day. At first, Halt directed his men to the exact site where Peniston and Burroughs had reported the craft 2 nights earlier. He noted 3 indentations in the frozen soil, matching the earlier reports, and took radiation readings. The counter clicked higher than normal, registering around 0.07 milliroentgens per hour, almost double the background level, though still too low to be dangerous. Even so, Halt's voice betrayed a note of unease as he confirmed the readings. As they moved deeper into the trees, the men suddenly noticed it: a strange, pulsating red light hovering through the woods. Halt described it as a glowing object, shedding sparks and moving silently between the trees. His voice on the tape grows tense. "There it is again, right on the horizon. Looks like an eye winking at you. It's blinking." The men tried to chase it, stumbling through the thick forest, but every time they approached, the light seemed to retreat, weaving in and out of sight. Then, as they broke into a clearing, the object appeared to split into several glowing orbs. Halt, struggling to remain composed, dictated, 3 objects in the sky. They're flashing red and blue lights. One orb, according to the men, suddenly shot a beam of light down into the forest. The narrow shaft illuminated the ground like a spotlight. Halt's voice, captured forever on tape, is a mixture of awe and alarm. "It's streaming down right at us. It's really incredible." For the next several hours, the team followed these lights across the forest and near the base perimeter. Halt claimed that at one point, beams of light even shone directly into RAF Bentwaters, the sister base nearby that stored nuclear weapons. To him, it was as if the mysterious objects were scanning or inspecting the facilities. Throughout the night, the lights appeared, disappeared, and reappeared in ways that defied explanation. They moved with a speed and agility no known aircraft possessed. They hovered silently, darted across the sky, and then stopped abruptly, as if watching. Halt's men, seasoned military personnel, later admitted they were deeply unsettled. And yet, skeptics would later argue that much of what Halt described could be explained by celestial objects: the bright star Sirius twinkling in the winter sky, the planet Venus low on the horizon, and the powerful rotating beam of the Orford Ness lighthouse, which, from certain angles, matched the winking eye light Halt reported. But even if the lighthouse explained some of it, what about the beams of light? The elevated radiation readings? The men's fear, captured in real time on tape? By dawn, Halt and his team withdrew, shaken but determined to report what they had witnessed. Halt later typed up a formal memo, now known as the Halt Memo, and submitted it to the Ministry of Defense. In it, he outlined the sightings, the ground impressions, the lights, and the unexplained radiation. But instead of triggering a major investigation, the MOD filed it away with a simple response: The incident posed no threat to national security and required no further action. For Halt, this was not just a dismissal, it was a cover-up. In later years, he would publicly state that what he and his men saw that night was not of this earth. And yet, in 1980, the official story was silence. No reports in the newspapers, no acknowledgement from the military. The mystery of Rendlesham was now a secret whispered in barracks, a strange tale passed around with nervous laughter. But the men who had seen it knew there was nothing funny about what they had encountered. The forest, once again, had swallowed the truth. Evidence or illusion? The morning after Lieutenant Colonel Halt and his men tracked lights through Rendlesham Forest, the base was buzzing with rumors. Soldiers whispered about strange beams piercing the night sky, about glowing orbs darting between the trees. Some laughed, others avoided the topic altogether. But for the men who had gone into the forest, this wasn't a joke. It was something they couldn't shake off. At first light, the investigators returned to the site of the supposed landing. There, they confirmed what Peniston and Burroughs had reported on the first night. 3 distinct impressions in the frozen ground, arranged in a perfect triangle. Each indentation was shallow, about 1.5 inches deep, but too precise to dismiss. Around the site, broken branches dangled from nearby pines, as though something heavy had pressed down on them. And strangest of all, a patch of bark appeared scorched, as if burned by heat or light. To Halt's team, these were signs of a craft that had physically touched down. To skeptics, they were little more than natural marks in a heavily used woodland. Later, when local Suffolk police were called in, they looked at the indentations and shrugged. Their conclusion was blunt. The marks were animal diggings, likely from rabbits. As for the scorched branches, the police report suggested that they could have been broken by wind or wildlife. But Halt's Geiger counter readings complicated things. In several spots, the radiation level measured slightly higher than normal background readings. The increase was not dangerous, but it was real. Could rabbit holes really cause that? Could a lighthouse beam leave radiation traces in the soil? The debate only deepened as the days passed. Halt submitted his now famous memo to the Ministry of Defense, carefully describing the lights, the impressions, and the radiation readings. But the MOD's response was swift and dismissive. They concluded that the incident posed no threat to national security and therefore required no further investigation. In their view, whatever had happened in Rendlesham Forest was a curiosity, not a crisis. For Halt and his men, this dismissal felt like a betrayal. They had risked their credibility by reporting what they saw. Now, it seemed the government wanted the story buried. Outside official channels, however, the story began to spread. In local pubs and among civilian UFO enthusiasts, whispers grew louder. Some claimed that the military had witnessed a genuine UFO landing. Others speculated about Cold War secrets, perhaps an experimental Soviet drone, or a classified NATO craft being tested under cover of night. And then came the skeptics. Astronomers and investigators argued that most of the sightings could be explained without invoking extraterrestrials. They pointed to the Orford Ness Lighthouse, located 5 miles away. Its powerful rotating beam, when seen through the trees, could easily appear as a pulsing light. On a foggy night, it might even look like it was hovering or winking. Others noted that the bright star Sirius dominated the winter sky in December 1980, low on the horizon and twinkling with red, blue, and white hues. To men in a tense, adrenaline-fueled patrol, Sirius might well have looked like a strange object darting across the treeline. Even the mysterious beams of light, skeptics argued, might have been nothing more than atmospheric reflections, a trick of the eye caused by the lighthouse or by other celestial bodies shining through mist. But for the airmen who had been there, these explanations felt hollow. Could a lighthouse really account for beams of light shooting into the base itself? Could Sirius truly explain an object that split into multiple orbs and hovered in silence? One detail often forgotten in skeptical retellings is the psychological weight of the experience. Multiple trained military men described their fear, their confusion, their sense that what they were witnessing was beyond normal explanation. These were not civilians looking for UFOs. They were soldiers, familiar with aircraft, trained to remain calm under pressure. And yet, the official record refused to recognize their fear as valid. The mod's choice not to investigate only added fuel to conspiracy theories. Was the government covering up a UFO landing? Or was it simply unwilling to spend resources on what it saw as a distraction? As days turned into weeks, the Rendlesham incident began to fade from official memory. The forest returned to silence, the indentations disappeared under new growth, and the world moved on. But for those who had been there, Peniston, Burroughs, Halt, and others, the memories remained sharp, vivid, and unsettling. Even years later, when interviewed, Halt could recall the exact moment beams of light streamed down into the forest. His voice grew firm, even defiant. This was not a lighthouse. This was not a star. This was something we could not explain. The clash between evidence and skepticism left Rendlesham dangling in the balance. A story caught between belief and dismissal, fact and illusion. To some, it was a simple case of misidentification. To others, it was Britain's Roswell. A moment when the impossible touched down in the dark woods of Suffolk. Whatever the truth, the Rendlesham Forest Incident was no longer just a military oddity. It was becoming a legend, one that would outgrow the base, the mod, and even the men who first saw it.
Theories, hoaxes, and cover-ups.
By the early 1980s, the Rendlesham Forest Incident was already being whispered about as Britain's Roswell. But unlike Roswell, where wreckage and bodies were rumored, Rendlesham's evidence was intangible. Lights in the sky, indentations in the soil, voices on a tape. That gap between the extraordinary claims and the lack of physical proof gave birth to an endless storm of theories, hoaxes, and conspiracy talk. At the center of it all was Lieutenant Colonel Halt. For years after the incident, he insisted that what he and his men saw was real and that it was being deliberately hidden by the authorities. In later interviews, Halt accused the Ministry of Defense of running a cover-up, deliberately downplaying the case by labeling it as no threat to national security. He claimed that the mod collected evidence but quietly shelved it away, never allowing a proper investigation. But if the government was covering something up, what was it? One theory suggests that the entire affair was connected not to aliens, but to Cold War espionage. RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters were not ordinary bases. They were strategically critical, rumored to house nuclear weapons. Could the lights in the sky have been a Soviet reconnaissance drone or advanced spy satellite testing NATO defenses? If so, the government's silence might have been less about aliens and more about keeping Cold War secrets under wraps. Yet, the story took even stranger turns. In 2003, a retired U.S. Air Force policeman named Kevin Condé stepped forward and claimed responsibility for the whole event. According to Condé, he had rigged up his patrol car with special lights and played a prank on his fellow airmen, driving through the forest to spook them. For a while, his confession made headlines until questions arose. Could one man's car really produce beams of light that darted across the sky for several nights? Could a prank explain the radiation readings, or the dozens of independent testimonies? Under pressure, Condé later admitted his story may not explain all the details. Then came an even darker theory, one that sounded almost too bizarre to believe. In 2018, journalist David Clark uncovered claims that the incident was actually staged by the SAS, the Special Air Service, Britain's elite soldiers. The story goes like this. A year before the UFO incident, American forces had mistakenly captured and humiliated a group of SAS troops during a training exercise, believing them to be enemy infiltrators. To get revenge, the SAS allegedly staged an elaborate hoax in Rendlesham Forest, dropping flares, using black balloons, even creating strange lights to terrify the U.S. airmen. They supposedly called it Operation Starlight. It's the kind of tale that feels both absurd and strangely possible. But when Clark pressed for details, the story crumbled. No SAS veterans came forward to confirm it, and evidence was non-existent. Clark himself eventually admitted it was likely a hoax, a story made up by locals to keep the legend alive. If not a prank, then perhaps nature itself was to blame. In recent years, scientists have suggested that the lights may have been caused by electromagnetic plasma phenomena, a rare natural occurrence where the Earth releases bursts of charged particles into the atmosphere. Plasma can create glowing lights, interfere with electronics, and even induce hallucinations. Some believe this could explain the UFOs, the radiation readings, and even the sense of dread felt by the airmen. But here's the catch. Plasma fields are unpredictable and poorly understood. To this day, no one has been able to prove they were active in Rendlesham Forest that December. Meanwhile, skeptics continue to point back to the simplest explanations: the lighthouse, the stars, and the imagination of frightened men. To them, Rendlesham is not a story of alien contact or Cold War technology. It's a case study in human perception. At night, in a tense environment, even trained soldiers can mistake ordinary lights for something extraordinary. Add a dash of fear, adrenaline, and suggestion, and a whole squad can convince themselves they've seen the impossible. But if it was all just an illusion, why did so many witnesses stick to their stories for decades? Why did Halt, Peniston, and Burroughs continue to risk their reputations, insisting they saw something that defied logic? The Rendlesham case lives in this gray space, balanced between the mundane and the extraordinary. Every theory, from Soviet drones to SAS pranks, from plasma bursts to alien craft, has holes. None fully explain all the details, and that is what keeps the mystery alive. For skeptics, Rendlesham is a tale of human error. For believers, it's proof that something otherworldly touched down in Suffolk. For the men who were there, it is a memory they cannot forget. A night when reality slipped, and the forest whispered secrets no one has yet decoded. And while governments deny, scientists argue, and pranksters boast, one truth remains. Something happened in Rendlesham Forest. Something that left men shaken, left traces in the soil, and left behind one of the most enduring mysteries in UFO history.
Legacy of the Rendlesham Mystery.
For decades have passed since that cold December of 1980, yet the shadows of Rendlesham Forest still seem alive. What began as a strange sighting among a handful of U.S. Air Force men has grown into one of the world's most famous UFO mysteries. For some, it is nothing more than misidentified lights and overactive imaginations. For others, it is proof that something unearthly visited Britain's soil. And for the men who were there, it remains an open wound, an experience that never left them. The incident quickly earned a nickname, Britain's Roswell. Like the Roswell crash in New Mexico, Rendlesham became a cultural lightning rod. It has inspired books, documentaries, debates, and countless conspiracy theories. And just like Roswell, it is a story where every explanation leaves new questions. Even today, tourists can walk a marked UFO trail through Rendlesham Forest. The path leads curious visitors to the very clearing where Peniston and Burroughs claimed to see a triangular craft, and to the site where Halt measured his strange radiation readings. Wooden signs retell the story in cautious language, but for those who walk the trail at dusk, the forest itself seems to whisper, as if holding onto secrets. For the witnesses, the legacy is far more personal. Jim Peniston has spent years defending his account. He still insists he touched the craft that first night and saw strange symbols carved into its surface. In later years, he revealed another bizarre detail. He claimed that when he touched those markings, his mind was flooded with a sequence of binary code, a stream of ones and zeros that he later wrote down. When decoded, the message supposedly contained coordinates pointing to mysterious sites around the globe. To skeptics, it sounded like a story that grew with time. To believers, it was evidence of contact, a message left behind for humanity. John Burroughs, meanwhile, battled health issues that he linked to exposure during the incident. For years, the U.S. Veterans Affairs Department denied responsibility, until eventually acknowledging that he had been injured in the line of duty. Burroughs saw this as an indirect admission that something unusual, perhaps even dangerous, had happened in Rendlesham. And then there is Colonel Halt. In 2010, long after retirement, he signed a formal affidavit declaring his belief that the objects he saw were extraterrestrial in origin. He has never backed down. To him, this was not misidentified stars, not a lighthouse, not a prank. It was contact with something beyond human technology. Halt has openly accused both the US and UK governments of covering up the truth, deliberately dismissing the case to avoid public panic. Of course, critics are quick to point out that Halt's affidavit does not match his original memo. His descriptions grew more dramatic over the years, and skeptics argue that memory can be reshaped by time, belief, and suggestion. The more Rendlesham was discussed in books and television shows, the easier it became for details to blur, for men to convince themselves of more than what they saw. Still, the MOD's handling of the case remains a sore point. The official line has always been that Rendlesham posed no threat to national security. No further investigation was ever launched. Yet many ask, if nothing happened, why did the MOD keep the files classified for decades before finally releasing them under pressure? And even when released, why were so many documents missing or incomplete? Was it bureaucratic neglect or deliberate censorship? The cultural fascination has only grown. UFO researchers, paranormal investigators, and conspiracy theorists all claim Rendlesham as one of their cornerstones. The story has been featured in countless documentaries, dramatizations, and even dramatized radio plays. For believers, it stands alongside Roswell as undeniable evidence that governments are hiding the truth about UFOs. But perhaps the most haunting part of the Rendlesham case is not the theories, nor the documents, nor the debates. It is the human side. Multiple men, trained military personnel, all describe fear, awe, and the sense of being in the presence of something extraordinary. These weren't UFO enthusiasts chasing lights in the sky. They were soldiers, men of discipline and duty. And to this day, they stand by their accounts. Rendlesham remains a paradox. If it was just the lighthouse, why did so many experienced men insist otherwise? If it was a prank, how did it fool multiple teams over multiple nights? If it was extraterrestrial, why has no clear evidence ever surfaced? The forest offers no answers. By day, Rendlesham is peaceful, its tall pines stretching silently into the Suffolk sky. But at night, when the wind whistles through the trees and the shadows grow long, some visitors swear the air feels different, heavy, electric, as if the woods themselves remember what happened. Even now, for decades later, locals and UFO hunters still gather on anniversaries, peering through the trees, waiting for the lights to return. Some come with cameras and recording gear, others simply to feel the weight of the mystery. And occasionally, strange reports still trickle out. Unexplained lights, strange movements, whispers in the night. The truth of Rendlesham may never be known. Perhaps it was all illusion. Perhaps it was a Cold War secret that slipped into the wrong hands. Or perhaps, on those cold December nights of 1980, something from another world really did descend into a quiet English forest. Whatever the case, one thing is certain. Rendlesham Forest will forever remain haunted by its secrets. A place where the line between reality and legend blurs, where soldiers swore they touched the impossible, and where the silence of the trees still carries the echoes of lights that should never have been there. And that is why, even today, the Rendlesham Forest Incident is remembered not just as a story, but as a warning. Because sometimes, the greatest mysteries do not hide in distant galaxies. Sometimes they land quietly in our own backyards.